back, everyone, to the Dynasty Slant. This is Scott Spratt, and I'm joined, as always, by Michael Moore. We're both writers for PFF Fantasy. Longtime listeners and fans of PFF Fantasy may remember me and Michael as former hosts of a show that's very much like this. Probably more of you accidentally clicked on this because you were looking for Scott Barrett's podcast. Sorry, you can't undownload us, so you're stuck listening to us at least for this week. We're actually going to be your go-to source for all Dynasty-related fantasy topics and keeper leagues as well. But we're going to be part of the PFF Fantasy Specialist podcasts that includes The Nickel with Walton and Ross, which comes out on Wednesdays and talks IDP, and Chalk Talk with Scott Barrett and Tyler, which will come out on Thursdays, talking DFS. But this is all about Dynasty. And Michael, I'm glad to have you back. It seems like it's been forever, but it's going to be just like riding a bike, I assume, right?
Well, yeah, Scott, I was going to say we've missed you all these years when you went away, so it's glad to have you back. And yeah,
Thanks.
Like you said, for those longtime listeners, they may remember our rapport, which I thought was, quite honestly, the best in podcast history. So all of you need to strap in and get ready for a good time.
It's probably difficult for people to find our archives, so I think that's pretty believable and no one can prove us wrong, right?
Probably, yeah. I think if we've learned anything this year, it's I can say anything, and some people will believe it to be true. So there you go.
Excellent. Well, we have a lot to cover this week and every week, so let's go ahead and get started with our first segment.
Oh my God, it's picked off!
Topic 6.
Okay, topic 6. This is going to be our featured segment throughout most of the fantasy football season when we actually have some games to react to. Our plan here is to just take 6 interesting topics and discuss what we think the fantasy takeaways are in Dynasty formats. Michael, I want to start with maybe a surprising place for Dynasty fans, but with Adrian Peterson and the Cardinals. Peterson actually carried the ball 21 times again for the Cardinals on Thursday in their loss to Seattle, and he now has 95 carries in his 4 games with his new team. Given that Peterson is actually playing on a 2-year contract, how do you think the Cardinals' backfield is going to shake out in 2018 when David Johnson is back from his broken wrist?
Well, okay, Scott, let's first get some facts out of the way. He's 32 right now, okay? He'll be 33 next year, which, don't get me wrong, Adrian Peterson is a freak of nature, but even I am not that optimistic that he can continue this run, even for the rest of this season. But furthermore, I think, a big question in this offseason for the running back situation there and the team in general is who's going to be the quarterback. You've got Carson Palmer,
great point.
Who got injured. He's obviously not coming back this year. It's possible he doesn't come back ever. You've got Drew Stanton there. I don't think anyone thinks he's the long-term answer. I mean, I think when they signed Peterson, or rather traded for Peterson from New Orleans, there was still maybe some hope that they could, slide into the playoffs and they can make some noise there. But that was before Palmer went down. Obviously, they needed something after David Johnson got hurt because what they were using with either Chris Johnson or Andre Ellington just wasn't working. So I don't know, man. Do I think there's going to be some random dynasty teams that probably have Peterson the rest of the season and he may win them a few games? Yeah, probably. But long-term or beyond this season, I don't trust it at all.
Well, I think New Orleans had sort of a similar thought to what you're saying here when they signed him in the first place, because his contract is pretty much all incentives. If the Cardinals don't want to bring Peterson back, then I don't think they have to. There's not going to really be any cap ramifications or anything along those lines. But I will say that I think Peterson's been playing pretty well. If you just look at his 3.6 yards per carry, that's on the low side. It's not super impressive. But he's also seen 25 carries with at least 8 men in the box since he's joined the Cardinals. No other back is even within 9 of that for the whole season. So teams, this is since Palmer got hurt, basically teams are just loading up to stop Peterson because they know that Stanton can't do much else with it. I've kind of been impressed with what I've seen. Do you think he still looks good as a player?
I do, and let me say this. Just because I don't think he'll be with Arizona next year doesn't mean I don't think he'll have a place in the league. I think he probably will, but with Arizona, like you said, there's not much to the cap there. If they cut him, they're going to save $3.5 million, which it's not like they've got a ton of cap room like my 49ers, but we'll get to that in a minute. But they've got David Johnson coming back who makes $750,000 next year. And look, I go back to the quarterback question, which even if Carson Palmer does come back and they make another run, I still think David Johnson's the better option there. And look, they won with him last year. He was obviously very effective. So I think, I don't know that they're going to put, I guess, more financial resources towards that position than they have to. Now with Peterson, I agree. He's looked, good at times, and I think he'll probably, sign on with some other team next year. I mean, who knows? Maybe Seattle, who I know we'll talk about them in a minute too, but some running back needy team next year, I think, could take a flyer on him. I just don't think it will be in Arizona.
So let me ask you specifically about David Johnson then. Do you think he's still a top 5 dynasty back? And do you think he's a top 5 pick in 2018 redraft leagues?
I think he is a top 5 pick. I think, as is often the case with fantasy football, he's kind of out of sight, out of mind. So people may be forgetting just how crazy of a season he had last year. And to me, he's still top 5. I would still treat him as top 5. I think, again, barring whatever the situation is in Arizona next year, but if, let's say, Peterson is not there, no matter what the quarterback situation,
right. Mm-hmm.
I think Johnson is definitely still a top 5 pick for me. What about you?
I'm not sure the definite really works for me, and it's because when we entered this season, it seemed so sparse at running back. We basically had him and Le'Veon Bell, and we hoped we had Ezekiel Elliott for the full season, and that was kind of it, right? And Melvin Gordon, sure. But this season, I feel like running back has gotten a lot better. And in particular, I'll point to Todd Gurley, Kareem Hunt, Le'Veon Bell, and Melvin Gordon all have more than 30 catches already this season. They're all on pace for more than 50. And Elliott and Leonard Fournette have 19 and 17 catches and should reach 30 before the end of the season. It seems like we're actually kind of flush at running back for a change. And I wonder if that means that those guys are going to take precedence because of the uncertainty with Johnson, even if that uncertainty is just that, Peterson could be back.
Well, and you kind of touched on a good point, regarding maybe redrafts next year or even dynasty startup drafts next year, which is, I agree there's an influx of really good running backs. And quite honestly, to get a little ahead of ourselves, there's going to be probably more in this rookie class in 2018.
Definitely.
So I agree that there's going to be a ton of running backs available. But to me, and look, what that could mean is we're entering sort of a new phase of fantasy drafts where for a long time with dynasty startup drafts, and see if you agree with this, we had very elite receiver options. They took up the top spots in startup drafts, whether it was Beckham, Mike Evans, Antonio Brown, that kind of stuff. Which, not to say those guys still aren't elite either, but now you've got all these running backs that are coming in that I think could challenge for, being drafted that high, whether it's startup drafts or 2018 redrafts or whatever. So I say all that to say, I think with Johnson, to me, he's still very high up there, very top 5. And look, I think the more important thing with this injury is it wasn't a lower body injury. It wasn't like an ACL that he tore that he's having to rehab from. It was the wrist, which still serious enough to knock him out most of the season. But that's not something that I think could, significantly alter, I guess, his value to me. So to me, he's still top 5 just because of what he did was so crazy that I just find that hard to believe that he wouldn't be able to, if not match that, then come pretty close to that again.
One last question before I move on to the next topic. If I could give you Johnson's future career and say it was LaShawn McCoy's, would you take that? Would you be happy with that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, because that's kind of where I could see him going in everything that might entail.
Completely. And look, I'm a big fan of LaShawn McCoy personally. Even in the last year or two when he has, obviously gotten up there in age, he's still producing. I mean, I think a lot of people were afraid when he went to Buffalo originally that, there's no talent around him. How's he ever going to produce like he did in Philadelphia? But he did, and then some. And he's a freak too. And not to say, going back to Peterson, that Peterson can't replicate that. But I'm a big, if a guy has continued to show it like McCoy has and hasn't dropped off, I'm all for taking them again next year. And like you said, I think with Johnson, I think we'll see that again once he finally does return, whether it's this season or next season if they hold him out that long.
Okay, let's jump to the next topic. This one I found really interesting, in particular because of a really cool highlight that everyone should probably look up. But rookie running back Austin Ekeler for the San Diego, already screwed that up.
Scott.
Man, I've been out of this for a long time, Michael. For the Los Angeles Chargers of Anaheim, he had 5 catches for 77 yards and 2 touchdowns, and their teams lost to the Jaguars over the weekend. And I wanted to ask you, Michael, whether you thought Ekeler had dynasty value.
I definitely think he does. I mean, if any position is prone to what I'll call opportunity from a fantasy standpoint, it's definitely running back, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you get what I'm saying, where you have to take into account, okay, is this a bell cow situation? Is this a running team? Stuff like that. What has the coach done, or what has the offensive coordinator done before? And if anything, that is the position that you can plug and play a lot of guys. Not everyone. I mean, not a David Johnson type, but a lot of guys. And I think that's definitely the case here, where I know a lot of people like Melvin Gordon. I know you like Melvin Gordon, Scott, and he, is a top 5 option for some, or at least top 10. But I don't know. It's not like I'm sold that Melvin Gordon is a franchise back, whether it's real life or your fantasy team, right? So I think with Ekeler, whoever is behind Gordon and can show him to be competent, like Eckler's been, I think there's a real possibility that he contributes at some point. Not even counting any possible injury or anything like that. I just think they're going to try to work him in more, especially probably in the passing game too. I mean, I think they've got Gordon, and I think we all had dreams and aspirations that Gordon was going to be the next 3-down back and handle every single down for them, but I don't think that's probably a good use of his time. I mean, he hasn't even averaged more than 4 yards per carry, which I realize is an extremely basic and rudimentary stat, but still, you've got the David Johnsons and the Le'Veon Bells of the world who can do that, in their sleep, and Gordon hasn't done that yet. So I think with Ekeler, they definitely want to see what they got, and I definitely think the next couple weeks are probably going to be that time to see if they've got, is he a passing down guy only? Can he handle some snaps? I mean, they tried to this last week. They even gave him some snaps, when they were up. He did fumble, which is never good. But I think that shows you that they're at least contemplating using him in big spots here.
I think it's a lot more clear-cut than you made it out to be, because I think that Ekeler will have a clear role, and it's because he's 5'10 and 195 pounds. He's just too small to be an every-down kind of player. But I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I think Gordon can be a prototypical 3-down back, and Ekeler can be a pass-catching back, and both of them can be effective in fantasy. Clearly not to the same extent, but a lot of what I've read, in fact, from an Ekeler interview before he got drafted, was that he sort of saw himself as a Danny Woodhead type of player that could maybe have that sort of route to success in the NFL. And, we've seen guys like this year, like Chris Thompson, be fairly productive in fantasy, even though they're only getting 11, 12 touches a week. So I'm thinking that maybe Ekeler could be that and maybe be effective in a PPR sense, even if he can't really hold up to extended work. Does that seem to pass test for you?
Yeah, so let me ask you this. What do you think, and again, this is all projection, but what do you think his ceiling is? Like, as far as a passing down goes, what is the ceiling for him? Is it a Woodhead type? Is it a Chris Thompson type? I think there's varying degrees of that role. So which degree do you think he falls in right now?
I mean, my ceiling for him would be maybe 5 to 6 targets a week, maybe 10 to 12 total touches a week. But with that, a high fantasy point per touch type of deal that could make him, say, a top 35 player in PPR in fantasy in his best seasons.
Okay. So he could have that Chris Thompson type, role where, hey, he doesn't see the ball much, but when he does, he makes some big plays when he's got it.
Yeah. I mean, I see him more that way than I would say maybe a Tevin Coleman, another guy that gets a lot out of a very little amount of touches. But Coleman's a player that I could see actually getting more work in the future, which I don't really see Ekeler doing that.
Right. Yeah, I guess I could see that. I think, with the Chargers, it's not, I think a lot of people had high hopes for them as a team this year and thought they would be winning a lot more games than they have ended up winning. So I don't want to say that the Chargers have kind of, called it a season and they're kind of looking towards next year, but I feel like a little bit, and they kind of want to test some things out, whether it's Gordon, whether it's Ekeler. I mean, with Gordon, next year's going to be a big year for him. He's going to be 26 next year. He's in a walk year. So
yeah.
Last year's the last year of his rookie deal. And look, the Chargers are going to have to make a pretty big decision on him soon. Whether, hey, do they want to bring him back? Do they let it ride it out? And if they want to let it ride it out, they better have a plan in place. And whether it's Ekeler or, like you said, even if it's not Ekeler because he can't handle the 2-down role, they better get somebody else. But the funny thing with Ekeler, just as a side note, he's so new and so, I guess, I don't know what the term would be, but so unplayed. he doesn't even have a photo on Roto World. Did you see that? Like, I kept refreshing because it would show like the image where you usually have one, and there was nothing there. Like, there's no image there. That's how new on the scene this guy is. So anyway, long story short, I think he does have some value. I think, as with a lot of guys, probably the peak of their value is right in the beginning when they start turning heads, which would be now. So if you're going to get on the ground floor, I think that time is probably now.
Hey, Michael, your 49ers won a game. It was super exciting. CJ Beathard was excellent, 76% completion percentage on his passes. He threw 2 touchdowns. He ran in another one. So with all of this great stuff happening for your 49ers, I just have to ask, when do you think they're going to start playing Jimmy Garoppolo?
All right, so let's break this down, Scott, shall we? Let's go through this. So,
I want to hear it.
So CJ Beathard did very well. It was against the Giants, who, well, I mean, we have a few Giants fans on the PFF fantasy staff, which I really feel for, because at least I feel with the 49ers, there's a plan in place. Like, we know we're not going to be good, but it's all building towards the future. I feel like the Giants had way higher expectations this year. And they seem to be just everyone's punching bag, where people are scoring at will. They're not running the ball at all. It's just really sad. So anyway, I say all that to say, take the CJ Beathard game with a grain of salt. It was the Giants. I mean, if you saw some of the coverage of the Giants secondary yesterday, it was pretty bad. So to answer your question about Jimmy Garoppolo, they did trade him for a second-round pick, obviously a pretty high-cost draft capital-wise. I think conventional wisdom is, okay, they want to see what they got before they have to franchise him, right? Because his contract runs out. They do have the franchise tag option on this offseason, or, they obviously could re-sign him for a big deal, which I don't think they're going to do. I think if this were any other team, they would play him with maybe a month to go, give him 4 games. That would be a decent enough time to properly evaluate. However, these 49ers and this front office regime is a little different. So they've got a ton of cap room. They know they're not going to be good this year, probably not going to be contending, at least to the point, that they want to be next year. I think personally, you don't see Garoppolo this season at all.
Interesting.
I think they let him, I think they see what they have in Beathard. They give Beathard the snaps, who, let's face it, is even more green than Jimmy Garoppolo is. And they give Garoppolo a full offseason to work in Shanahan's system. They don't put any, sort of pressure on him this season. Because, look, I have no doubt there's going to be 49er fans clamoring for him. If you have him on your dynasty team, you're going to be clamoring for him. But with the 49ers, why? I mean, the season is gone. You're not making the playoffs. Why do you need to, I guess, do a move that would be a win-now move as opposed to seeing what you have in a guy like Beathard? Plus, and one more note. So as far as the money goes, so with Pierre Garçon, who they signed this offseason, I mean, they gave him a ton of money up front, which surprised some people. But people forget they've got a lot of cap room. Why would you tie yourself to any contract 3-4 years down the road when you can just give a lot of money to players up front this year and see what you have? You're not going to be good, so it's kind of like a tax to see what you have, which I think they would do with Garoppolo. They would franchise tag him even without seeing him, and then give him the entire offseason to work in the system, work with Shanahan, and truly, start fresh next season.
I mean, financially, I agree. That definitely makes sense. My only question is, could you learn anything from Garoppolo in 4 starts or whatever that would influence what you wanted to do in the draft, since the 49ers are going to have a really good pick there, right? Is there any chance that they're looking at a quarterback in the draft, especially if one of those, I mean, there are a few big-name college guys that could be there, or are they sort of set with Garoppolo in the future now?
I can't imagine they would have made this move if they were remotely interested in any of those guys, quite honestly, because they knew they were going to have a top pick. They knew they would have had their choice of any of those guys or most of those guys. And they still went out and traded a high second rounder, which, by the way, at this pace, it's going to be like the 33rd or 34th pick to New England for a quarterback. So I really don't think they like any of those guys. Otherwise, they would have stood pat. They would have kept their draft picks and gone through the process. I think in their mind, they've got Beathard, who, I don't think they have real high aspirations for him. I think if he could be a quality backup, they would take that. They want to give him snaps. They want to get him used to the NFL. That's fine. I just don't see why you would play Garoppolo now. If it's to improve your chances of winning this year, I wouldn't get it. And honestly, I just don't. I think playing him any games this season would, good or bad, would probably just exasperate their hopes for him in the offseason and fans' hopes. Meaning, if he lit it up the last month of the season, I mean, expectations are going to be sky high. And on the flip side, if he completely tanks it, they're going to have to deal with that offseason. So for me, keep him on the bench, let him learn, let him help Beathard play these games, and just start fresh next season.
So let's assume that's generally the team's plan. They're going to work Garoppolo in sometime more next year than this year. Where do you value him in Dynasty relative to some of these other guys at the position that are sort of young, up-and-comer types? So I'll throw out first, do you prefer Garoppolo long-term or Jared Goff?
Oh, Jared Goff.
Yeah, I mean, I think we may talk about him a little bit later, but
Right.
Goff is rising up my boards, so I get that. What about Garoppolo versus Mitch Trubisky in Chicago?
I would, well, and again, you can call it a little biased. I'd probably go Garoppolo. I think Garoppolo has shown a little more in the very limited time they've had. I also think I trust the coaching in place with Garoppolo rather than Chicago. And we'll get to this in a little bit with another segment, but you just don't know what's going to happen in Chicago next year. It's a complete wild card. So at this point, I'd go Garoppolo.
I think that makes sense. I will mention that Trubisky, I know he's not asked to do a ton right now, but I've been kind of impressed when he has made throws, and he's completed 37.5% of his 16 deep passes, which is kind of in between guys like Stafford, Mariota, Wilson, and Wentz. So he's looking good when he tries to do stuff. He's just not really trying to do a lot.
Oh, look, if they can keep winning while he throws it 8 times a game, I'm sure they would love that.
Yeah, definitely. His fantasy owners won't love it, but the team will love it.
Yeah.
What about Garoppolo versus Patrick Mahomes?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Mahomes is probably someone that's going to take longer than Garoppolo to start, but
yeah, especially now that Alex Smith is torching the place in a good way.
The tools are just outrageous.
Right. That's a good one. I might lean Mahomes, but it would not be by much. I mean, I think the coaching is fairly equal between Shanahan and a guy like Reed. And like you said, I think the tools are very, very good. And look, let's face it, he had the tools to be a first-round pick where Garoppolo didn't. So I think I would probably lean Mahomes in that case.
Okay, one last guy. Garoppolo versus DeShone Kizer.
Oh, man, you talk about a roller coaster for his fantasy value, his real-life value at all. So, I might go Garoppolo for the same reason I went with him over Trubisky. Who knows what the coaching is going to look like next year? And let's face it, that's still a team that could draft a quarterback next year. It's very possible. So
I think they will.
Yeah, I think Garoppolo in that case.
Yeah, I mean, I want to like Kizer. Obviously, physically, he's just amazing. He can do a lot of things that other quarterbacks can't do. But just looking back, he only completed 60.7% of his passes in college. A lot of the guys in the NFL that we think of as being inaccurate, like Cam Newton and Jameis Winston, those guys were completing 66% of their passes in college. To me, that's a big difference, and I wonder whether Kizer will ever be accurate enough to make it at that level.
Which is really a shame because, I mean, he was set up, to do pretty well. I mean, yes, you could argue they maybe rushed him, but, in this day and age, like if you draft a quarterback, with a first or second pick, you just have to expect they're going to start early. And we thought that he had receivers to do well. He obviously had a decent running game. We all thought Hugh Jackson was the perfect coach to sort of mentor him and guide him along. But, I'm not a fan of like you bring him up and then you bench him and then you put him out there again. And now he got hurt with the ribs and it's just a mess. And he, with only being a second round pick, I think, he's probably a little more expendable than others at this point.
Next up, JuJu Smith-Schuster. Probably the best name in football these days.
Yep.
He caught his 3rd touchdown in the last 3 games, and he's got 5 total touchdowns on the season, and is number 24 among fantasy receivers in standard scoring. Michael, do you prefer him or the field among rookie wide receivers in Dynasty?
Well, I think, let me ask you a question first, Scott. Would you rather have JuJu Smith-Schuster or HaHa Clinton Dix on your fantasy team?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'd rather have.
It's the same kind of name structure.
Oh, yeah.
and it's two last names. I mean, it's like they both had the same formula for names. You just picked a different name to drop in there.
The one thing I know is that JuJu's original name was John, and he changed it to JuJu, I think, as a tribute to his father or a relative of his, which I appreciate that. But is HaHa's real name HaHa? Because that's pretty strong.
No, it's Hassan or Hashan. I forget how to pronounce it because nobody calls him that anymore. But it's Hashan or Hassan. So. Yeah, I mean, it's tough, man. If you had to pick one, you have to pick one right now. Which one do you pick?
God, this may be the hardest question of the show. I think I'm going to have to go with Smith-Schuster because you get the double S alliteration, which I have that in my own name. You know, we got a little bit of that brotherhood going on. So I'll go Smith-Schuster, but it's as close as it can be.
It's very close. I think I would agree with you just because I think in general people like and probably have well, I mean, you could say they like saying JuJu more than HaHa, but
I don't know.
HaHa is inherently more enjoyable and amusing than JuJu. So I don't know. It's tough.
We'll circle back to that in future shows. Let's get to his actual fantasy value.
Okay. So compared to other rookie receivers, so let's take the first receiver taken in this draft, Corey Davis. I probably still take Corey Davis. Obviously, we haven't seen a lot from him, but I think just physically, Corey Davis was drafted top 5 for a reason. I think I'd still probably take him. I mean, is that fair to say? Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah. In fact, Davis is really, I think, the only one of the rookie receivers I'd still rather have than Smith-Schuster.
Really?
I like that he's paired with Mariota, the young quarterback, to work with. I like that he's clearly going to be the Titans' #1 receiving option. Fantasy players may not realize Delanie Walker is 33 years old, so they don't really have a lot of good youth on the team. So I could really see him breaking out next year to be like one of the best 15 wide receivers in fantasy. A lot of the other guys, I mean, let's just say, are John Ross and Mike Williams. Is there anyone else that's even in this conversation?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you've had, a couple of the second-round guys like Zay Jones. He, has graded very poorly according to our own PFF graders. You've got a guy like Cooper Kupp on the Rams who, again, I don't know how high his ceiling necessarily is. I mean, obviously he's a favorite of Jared Goff, but I don't know that, long-term you want to rely your dynasty team on that. So I will say I might disagree with you on Mike Williams. It's still close to me if you ask me that, only because I just really like Mike Williams, his physical tools. I like the situation he's in with the Chargers. I don't know when Phillip Rivers is going to retire, but I feel like they're going to have to wheel him off or pull him off the field to get out of there. Whereas JuJu, you've got Roethlisberger, who seemingly, at least the last couple off seasons, plays like this little game. I might retire. I might not retire. Today I feel like it. Today, I mean, it's very, fluid, I guess, is the situation there, which concerns me, quite honestly. I mean, at least with Rivers, I know he's going to be out there till his arm falls off. And, I mean, would you agree a function of why Smith-Schuster is doing so well fantasy-wise is the team he's on? The tools around him, the scheme, all that stuff. Can we agree on that?
Yes, although it's sort of a take and give situation because, Smith-Schuster is the #2 wide receiver behind Antonio Brown, and that's not changing anytime soon. So it's kind of a predicament. I mean, he's kind of got two issues to his long-term value. One is Antonio Brown being on his team. One being that Roethlisberger is an older quarterback that could retire soon. But both John Ross and Mike Williams each have one of those problems because John Ross is the second wide receiver behind A.J. Green, and Mike Williams, sure, you think that Rivers may last longer than Roethlisberger because he hasn't mentioned anything about retirement, but they're the same age. They're both getting to the point where very few quarterbacks have had any success except for Brady. So it could end really at any time for either of those guys.
Sure. Well, let's first clear something up. I think John Ross is like the third or fourth receiver on that team right now.
Okay. I'm thinking from more like a dynasty sort of longer-term perspective, yes.
Fair enough. That's okay.
Yeah.
And look, I agree with the Ross assessment. I think it's really unfortunate for Ross because obviously people were excited by the speed. He was a top 10 pick. But man, he's just on a team that is not conducive to fantasy points right now. And even if he eventually moves up and overtakes Brandon LaFell, which we all, I think, hoped he would do by now, it's not like Cincinnati throws it a lot at this point. So, But with Williams, I don't know. I just saw what other receivers could do there, whether it was Tyrell Williams, even Inman for a point last year, and obviously they've got Keenan Allen still. I would still maybe long-term favor Williams, but I think you're right. Other than those two, and for you, other than that one, Smith-Schuster is top of the class right now.
Okay, let's hit up topic 5. Jared Goff. We mentioned him a little bit earlier. He's actually thrown 7 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks and is a top 10 fantasy quarterback this season. Is he in your top 10 among dynasty quarterbacks, Michael?
Yes. Yeah, I can't answer that fast enough. So, yes.
I mean, I agree. Do you have any evidence you want to talk about, or is the 7 touchdowns all you needed to see?
Well, for me, it's all about 2 words. It's Sean McVay. That's really what it comes down to. I mean, he obviously came in. He did wonders in Washington with Cousins. And look, I'll be honest. I was skeptical about Goff heading into the season, quite honestly, because I thought either the Rams made a really unwise choice. But look, it turns out it's just Jeff Fisher was probably worse than we all thought as far as leading a team. And yeah, I mean, as long as McVay is there in LA and leading the way there, I think Goff is a perfect top 10. So let's do this. I'll play sort of a game with you too.
Okay.
I'm going to go down our PFF dynasty rankings as far as quarterbacks go. You tell me who you would rather have.
Okay.
So for the record, Jared Goff is currently on our rankings number 8. Okay. So let's just move up the list. Jared Goff or Ben Roethlisberger?
I'd definitely rather have Goff in dynasty.
I would too. Jared Goff or Matt Ryan?
I'd rather have Matt Ryan.
Okay. And I might agree with that. I could go either way, quite honestly. I mean, obviously Ryan's got sort of the track record, which just from a personal note, I tend to be conservative when it comes to my dynasty teams, meaning I really want to see more out of a player before I pay a whole lot or ride with a guy. And Matt Ryan, let's face it, has been very good for a very long time, as opposed to Goff, who really, we're talking half a season that he's been really good. But you've got like 5 years on Goff, or maybe closer to 10 actually, compared to Matt Ryan. So I could go either way. But all right, so Jared Goff or your boy Cam Newton, which your boy because you are literally living in North Carolina and the Panthers are your team. So.
Absolutely, Cam. Obviously, I'm totally biased.
Ooh, man, that's close for me now. I think Cam. I don't know what to make of Cam anymore. Which again, we're getting a little off track, but Cam, he scares me, man. I don't know what's going on there, but. We'll get into a little more of that later. Jared Goff or Dak Prescott?
Prescott. I think that one's pretty clear.
Okay. Jared Goff or Tom Brady? See?
Goff.
And I could see both. I could see an argument for both. I really could.
It clearly depends on the nature of the team that you have in Dynasty.
Sure. Right. Because I think we'd agree with Brady. You've got a 2 to 3 year window. No matter what Tom Brady says and no matter what nutrients Tom Brady's using, it's a 2 to 3 year window. I don't know that he can be this good for longer than that.
It's the nightshades, dude. I eat way too many tomatoes. Clearly.
Well, yeah, okay. By the way, should we try the Tom Brady diet for a week and then report back and see how that goes for the both of us, or do we not even want to go there?
Maybe you should try, and then I'll just hear about it, and that way I can still eat terrible for me. How's that sound?
Okay, I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, nice.
All right, so the last couple. So Jared Goff or Matt Stafford, who's number 2 in our dynasty rankings right now.
Yeah, I would pick Stafford. I think Stafford I have even above Matt Ryan, so that's kind of my pecking order there.
And then number 1, Jared Goff or Russell Wilson, which, okay, this may be, I'm sorry, hold on. It may be a little off. Okay. Yeah, so let's go Jared Goff can we agree that Aaron Rodgers is not, you would take Aaron Rodgers, right?
Clearly. I would clearly take Russell Wilson as well.
Okay, so that covers that. So anyway, long story short, yes, I think Goff's the top 10. I think as long as McVay there, he'll do well. I think, what is further proof to me is the weapons he has there. I mean, it's not like he's got a lot of really good weapons. And even the one he does have, Sammy Watkins, is 4th in targets. So we can't necessarily say that Goff's relying on Sammy Watkins there. He's using Cooper Kupp. He's using Robert Woods. And look, I think, they could definitely improve upon that, which I think is only good for Goff's value.
He's distributing the ball very nicely, which is it's a progression that you want to see from a young quarterback who those guys often see their first read and then take it or do nothing. So it's good that he's doing that. But I will say there's a couple things that are a little bit out of whack. In particular, he's completing just 61.2% of his passes, but has an 8.5 yards per attempt average. Those two don't really mesh in my mind. And I think it's happening because he's getting a high percentage of his yards coming after the catch, 51.2% in fact, which is top 5. It's not outrageous, it's just high. It's just kind of things that I think a few things are going Goff's way that are making him be a little bit better in fantasy than maybe he really is. But top 10 in the future, absolutely.
Yeah, and look, I can't disagree, obviously, with those numbers you said. To me, especially with a quarterback, it comes down to their situation and the coaching. Coaching's a big thing. And look, any of those guys that we mentioned before, one of the reasons, or any of the guys ranked behind Goff, I should say, a big part's probably the coaching, because you either don't know what the coaching situation is in the future, or it's already dicey. So anyway, yeah, I agree on that.
McVay and I are the same age. I'm not sure if I should be depressed or super proud.
Wow.
It's one of the two.
I was going to say, I've got a year or two, so I'm not there yet, but I definitely empathize with that.
Okay, number 6, Adam Thielen. He caught 8 balls for 166 yards and a touchdown in Case Keenum's career day versus the Redskins. He's number 5 among wide receivers in standard scoring. Not sure if you realize that. I'll go a little bit more conservative. Is he top 20 among your dynasty wide receivers?
Oh, I think so. I think he has to be at this point. I mean, he's put up those numbers with a combination of Case Keenum and Sam Bradford at quarterback.
Is that bad? Serious question. Is that bad? I feel like they're okay.
Maybe, but I think if anything, it just showed us that, hey, look, at the very least, it showed he can produce. He's not tied to one quarterback to produce, right? You could plug and play anyone there. Look, even if Bridgewater comes back, I think he probably still produces. And to me, the big thing is they re-sign him in the offseason, so they obviously want him there long term. And look, he's a big part of the game plan there. He's consistently catching 5 balls a game for them like it's nothing. And look, he's got the build that he can be a receiver that can last a while. It's not, it's not a trick player. He's not a gadget player or anything like that. So,
no.
I think, the consistency for me that he's shown this year has proven that he can be a top 20 guy. And look, even despite Stephon Diggs, who I think most people were probably excited about more so heading into this season, he's still producing at that rate, whether Diggs was injured or not. So, yeah, I would say top 20 is a pretty safe pick. Because, if he's your wide receiver 2 going forward, I think you're pretty happy with that.
Thielen has 11 targets per week over the last month, which is the most among all wide receivers, ahead of DeAndre Hopkins, Amari Cooper, ahead of everybody.
Yeah, and look, as you and I both know, targets are one of the biggest indicators of fantasy success when it comes to receivers. And if you're hauling those kind of numbers down, I think you're going to be pretty good.
All right, that does it for topic 6. So let's bounce over to our next segment.
Guys.
Gunpoint banter.
Gunpoint banner. I think this is going to be my favorite of all the segments. This is where Michael and I are going to go head-to-head on various topics ranging from stupid to maybe interesting to fantasy. And this week, I want to talk about teams that are not having the greatest season, but who could maybe end up becoming productive spots for rookie quarterbacks next season in fantasy. So, Michael, the floor is yours. I'll go ahead and list out the 8 teams that I think are someone we could consider, and then I'll let you give me who you think has the best situation for an incoming rookie quarterback. So we have the Cleveland Browns at 0-9, the Giants at 1-8, Denver Broncos and Los Angeles Chargers are 3-6. The Arizona Cardinals are 4-5, as are the Washington Redskins. And then we have the New York Jets and Miami Dolphins, both at 4-6. Which one is the best spot for a rookie quarterback?
Well, at this stage, I would pick Miami out of those 10 teams.
Okay.
And the reason is, and it kind of touches on what you and I discussed a little earlier, which is the coaching. It comes down to the coaching, meaning at least with Miami, I think there's a very good chance Adam Gase comes back. I mean, you never know. The NFL is kind of wonky lately, but I think there's a good chance Adam Gase comes back, which his prior history with quarterbacks has been very good. Obviously, he worked with Peyton Manning at the height of his powers there in Denver. He worked with Jay Cutler in Chicago and gave Cutler some of the best numbers of Cutler's career. Obviously, this season's been a little shaky, but even then, the Dolphins have I think they've won more games than, if you looked at their points that they've scored, probably should have. And I think there's just a lot of potential there for any guy coming in. They got Devontae Parker, who, I know we're all kind of still waiting for him to realize that potential, but I think he'll be there and waiting for any young quarterback that comes in. And, for most of the teams you mentioned, it's just a question on who's going to be the head coach there next year. It's a very big question for a lot of those teams, whether it's Cleveland, who's super dicey right now, who I don't know that Hugh Jackson stands a very good chance of coming back. The Giants, who may challenge for the Browns at this point for the top pick on the draft. You've got Denver, who, I'm not going to say it's probably early to say Vance Joseph is not a good coach, but I mean, when you're going into the offseason with Trevor Siemian or Paxton Lynch, and neither one of those guys works out, you got to bring back Brock Osweiler. Probably not a good sign there. You've got the Chargers, who, go back to what I mentioned before. I think Phillip Rivers is still there for a couple years, so I don't know that it's a good idea to bring a young quarterback in there now. The Cardinals would probably be the only team I could see could challenge Miami, at least of these teams available. Palmer might not come back next year, probably won't come back next year. You've got good players around Arizona at this point. It's only a matter of who sticks around. Like Larry Fitzgerald, for example. Is he going to want to stick around for kind of a rebuilding project? I don't know. And behind Larry Fitzgerald, they have yet to find a sort of receiver to take over that role, as much as they try with Jaron Brown, John Brown, J.J. Nelson. The Redskins, who knows what they do at quarterback? Does Cousins come back? Do they finally re-sign him? If they stumble anymore, do they get a new coach, as they are prone to do after a short amount of time? I don't know. And the Jets, well, you just don't know who's going to be coaching that team next year anyway. So anyway, for all those reasons, I would choose Miami at this point.
I think the Dolphins are a good pick, but I think the Giants are a better pick. And
really? So even despite the coaching, and if McAdoo is there or not, you're okay with a young quarterback going there.
So coaching is one of the reasons I think this is a plus, and this is what I'm calling the clean slate principle. I think it's always best when you can have like a coach working with a quarterback that sort of came in at the same time, and they can sort of build with each other. They can make sure they get the right guy to fit who they want their coach to be. And if that's what's going to end up happening for the Giants, you won't end up in a weird situation where you have a coach that maybe has already lost confidence. His GM has already lost confidence in him, so he's trying to win quickly instead of make the right decisions for the team long term. All kinds of stuff there. So I think it's going to be good that there could potentially be a clean slate in New York with a new quarterback and a new coach. Then you've got Odell Beckham Jr. and Evan Ingram, both top 5 at the position. Is that a bold claim? I feel like it's true.
Oh, I think that's a fact at this point.
Plus, there's a lot of other young talent on the team, from guys like Landon Collins, who's 23, Olivier Vernon, still 27, Damon Harrison is 28, Dalvin Tomlinson, the rookie defensive tackle, has been really good this year. He's 23. So I think it's a lot of good there. The one downside being that they have a poor offensive line, but hey, that's why Eli's in there getting crushed. The new guy can wait a little bit before he starts, and it'll be good.
It also, wouldn't it be like, it would just be a full circle thing for the Giants to draft a quarterback with a high pick and have Eli like groom him? Like, you remember when they drafted Eli and they had Kurt Warner in that sort of transition year? I mean, this would be too perfect. It's like, you know what, Eli, you've had your fun. You won 2 Super Bowls. It's time to move on, buddy.
If I were a team like the Browns, I'd be pretty ticked that the Giants seem to just perfectly fall into this cycle where, every 8 to 10 years or whatever, when they need a new quarterback, they have their crater year, and I'm sure they'll end up with a really good quarterback. Kind of reminiscent of the San Antonio Spurs when they had that one random bad year and landed Tim Duncan. You're just like, come on, guys.
Look, I mean, well, yeah, I can't really argue with
that. All right, we've got one more segment we want to hit this week before we wrap this thing up.
I'm telling you, these shares are hot.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. It's definitely a good idea.
Dwayne, I get it. Now, can you get me? Have I ever lied to you? That's right. And ask around. I never do, Dwayne.
Stash of the week.
All right, stash of the week. Here's another spot where Michael and I are going to go head-to-head every week, where we're both going to select a player that we think will probably be available in a lot of dynasty formats, that we think it's probably a good idea to go ahead and pick them up because we expect big things coming for them in the future. Michael, do you want to get us started here too?
Sure. So my stash of the week is going to be Curtis Samuel, receiver from the Panthers.
Yes.
I mean, look, if we had to work a 49er story in, where we're going to work a Panther story in.
That's very nice of you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. With Samuel, I mean, obviously the biggest development in recent weeks was the trading of Kelvin Benjamin, which, I don't know that a lot of people necessarily saw that coming, but I think a lot of people realized it made a lot of sense. If you aren't going to re-sign Benjamin, why not get something for him? And look, they got like a third rounder. Like I would be all for that, whether it was for my dynasty team or, real life. But with Samuel, they drafted him in the second round. Obviously, didn't have much of a defined role going in. I mean, he played more running back actually than receiver at Ohio State, but they drafted him for his speed. He runs a 4.340. This Benjamin trade really cleared out a lot of snaps and a lot of targets for him. I mean, Devin Funchess is sort of the de facto number one receiver there now, but they drafted Samuel specifically to be a complement to him, to Cam Newton. And look, I'm very excited about what they've done with Christian McCaffrey, their first-round pick, who a lot of people argued the same thing. It's like, what is his role? What is he going to do? Is he going to be running back? Is he going to be split out wide? And before you know it, he's leading the team in targets. He's up to like 72 targets on the season. So I think when Samuel finally has the opportunity, which he does now, and he's fully over the injury that he had too, I think he'll be very productive. Currently, our fantasy rankers have him about 70th, maybe a lot of people in the low 60s. I think that's a value at this point, and I still think you can get him for fairly cheap. So if you can get him or pick him up for your dynasty team, I definitely think you should stash him.
Yeah, I like that pick a lot, Michael. The one thing, having watched so many Panthers games, it seems like they're missing the vertical threat that they've had in recent years with guys like Ted Ginn and even Greg Olsen. Both of those guys were getting 20 to 30 deep looks a year. Right now, Devin Funchess has 10 passes, 20 yards down the field, and Ed Dixon has 7. And that's pretty much all they've got right now. So I think Samuel's going to fill a need for the team that they don't have from anybody else. All right, my stash of the week is Chris Carson, running back for the Seattle Seahawks. There's been so much turmoil and turnover at that position for the Seahawks that, frankly, I'm not even sure I would have remembered that Carson was part of the team if you had asked me before I started doing this research. But he was, 7th-round rookie pick. He was actually their primary back over the first month, like 8 running backs ago. But he fractured his ankle, which we thought was going to shut him down for the rest of the season. But Pete Carroll came out a couple days ago to indicate that Carson could potentially return in December. That's not a lock, but regardless of whether he can or not, I'd like to take a look at Carson in dynasty formats because the backs that have followed him have really not done the job. None of Eddie Lacy, Thomas Rawls, J.D. McKissick, or C.J. Prosise is averaging more than 2 yards after contact per attempt. And that's something they really need because of their poor run blocking. Carson was getting 2.6 yards after contact per attempt. And so I feel like that's a critical style need for the team given the composition of their offensive line. What do you think, Michael?
No, I agree with that. And again, I think it's another case of out of sight, out of mind, meaning he got injured fairly early in the season. So a lot of people for their dynasty teams put him on either on their injured reserve, maybe their taxi squad if they didn't use him a whole lot yet. But no, I think that's a great value. And again, it goes back to opportunity, meaning the lead back in Seattle under Pete Carroll is going to be a valuable piece. And again, that's not to say that Carson's going to be the next Marshawn Lynch and have double-digit touchdowns every
Beast
season.
Mode.
But, there you go.
Jeff weighing in on that, yes.
But, I mean, he's going to have an opportunity. And like you said, they've given so many backs there the opportunity. And we've all been eagerly awaiting whoever that would be, whether it was Thomas Rawls from his quasi-breakout season. A lot of people, I think, took flyers on Eddie Lacy because they thought, oh, well, he just needs to get healthy again. But even he hasn't produced it all this season for them. And they've tried a couple of lower round guys, whether it's Prosise or McKissick, that still hasn't worked. It seemed like the only guy they got really excited about was Carson. And I think now especially is going to be a really good time to get him because not many people are thinking about it. If you're a rebuilding team and maybe, or if you're a contender or even a rebuilding team, now's a good time to get him because you can either offer some lower level veteran or maybe a lower level pick. But bottom line is he's going to have some value going into next year for sure, and I don't think there's going to be a better time to get him than now.
Okay, that's going to do it for this episode of the Dynasty Slant. Thanks for everybody who joined Michael and me in what's going to be a weekly podcast. I expect it'll come out most weeks on Tuesday, and it'll be part of the PFF Fantasy Special podcasts that also include the IDP and DFS shows from our guys. So thanks so much for listening, and we hope to see you again next week.